Welcome, everyone, to Talking Back to Suicide. This is your host, Dr. Diane Kaufman, though I prefer to be called Diana for my creative self. I'm a poet, artist, Humanism in Medicine awardee, and internationally award winning lyricist of songs on mental health. And I'm also a retired child psychiatrist. I'm the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And with us today is our very special guest, uh, and his name is Steve Nowotniak, who is an occupational therapist with a master's degree earned from Utica University. He's a New York State certified peer specialist, certified psychiatric rehabilitation practitioner, and an Eagle Scout. Like many of us, Steve has experienced significant life challenges. In August 2002, he was hospitalized for a week with a major depressive disorder episode and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. From that point forward, Steve has spent his life learning how to live with his mental health condition on his journey from hospitalized patient to licensed mental health clinician and a mental health advocate. With this dedication, Steve went on to author and publish the Handbook for Healthy Living with a Mood Disorder and Bipolar Life Hacks, Keys to Loving Life with a Bipolar Disorder, to share the skills and tools he uses daily to live what he calls a desired quality of life. His award winning children's book, Mubu the Morph, is on the inner journey of discovering that pain can be transformed into purpose, healing ourselves and others. Steve has spoken at events including the International Association of Peer Specialists, the New York State Occupational Therapy Association, and colleges across the country and internationally to demystify mental health, to put an end to the stigma associated with mental health distress and illness, and to advocate for the evolution of the mental health system. So, welcome, Steve, to Talking Back to Suicide, and we're so glad to have you with us today.
Hello, I'm very excited to be here today as well. Thank you for inviting me on.
So, you have experienced many different things in your life, right? And one of those was in 2002. Could
Yes,
you share with us what led up to that, what symptoms you were having, and what ultimately helped you?
sure. So I want to actually take us back a couple years, and I want to
Sure.
begin in May of 2000. And my bachelor's was in earth science secondary education, and in order to get your permanent teaching certification in New York State, you need to have a master's. So I actually did a self-designed master's degree at Buffalo State University, and I hiked, biked, sailed, and canoed from Buffalo, New York, down to Key West, Florida. So I canoed across New York State on the Erie Canal, sailed the Hudson River down to New York City, backpacked the Appalachian Trail to Roanoke, Virginia, and biked to Key West, Florida. It took me 8 months. It was a wild adventure, and I felt on top of the world. 2 years later is when I was hospitalized for severe depression and diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And the hard part about this was that nothing I did could pull me out of that state of despair that led me to the hospitalization. I built my master's degree. I got my Eagle Scout when I was 14. I always had ebbs and flows with moods and energy, but I could always ride out of it. I could always pull myself out of it. But this episode, I couldn't. There was nothing I did that worked. And when I was hospitalized, I felt hopeless, I felt broken, and I felt ashamed. As I said, hopeless because nothing I did could pull me out of that state of despair. Broken because I was 27 years old, I had a master's degree, and I had no idea how to live. And ashamed because here now all that stigma associated with mental illness came crashing down upon me. This was my lowest point. and absolutely one that I will never forget. One of the biggest things that helped me was actually learning to live with bipolar disorder has been a process of 4 different perspectives. The first perspective was when I came out of the hospital, and that was coping with symptoms of an illness. It was focusing on how I was feeling. It was about medication and talk therapy. And really, it was about surviving and trying to cope and manage the symptoms and deal with coping strategies and just kind of get through the day. Again, the focus was how I was feeling. I joined a vocational program in New York State, and that introduced me to occupational therapy, where I went to school. And as I was going to school to be an occupational therapist, my focus had shifted. It had shifted from how I was feeling to what I was doing. It shifted from coping with symptoms of an illness to managing the needs of a condition. Because occupational therapy is all about how do you be successful in those meaningful activities that bring value to your life. That was the first shift, and that was the perspective that opened up my door to a different trajectory. As an occupational therapist, I got connected with the mental health peer movement. And in the mental health peer movement, I was able to set down the diagnosis and just get to know me, because it was about getting to know my strengths. It was about getting to know my challenges, but it shifted from managing the needs of a condition to a process of personal growth and development and wellness. It shifted from what I was doing to what I was becoming. And what happened was, it was no longer this illness that I was trying to deal with. It was just Steve getting to know Steve. And we're all human, and we all have challenges, and it's all imperfection. And it's just getting to know what are my challenges in my human journey. And I just got to get to know them so I can develop the skills and get the supports necessary to have both success and satisfaction in my life. One of the big things that opened up that perspective was the WRAP, the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, where you're getting to know what are those things that you do to be well and stay well and be connected with yourself and others. It was about getting to know what are the things that set me off. It was about getting to know what does it feel like when these symptoms start showing up, so I can be aware of what I'm going through. And then having plans to address all those situations. As I started to get to know that, I started to share what this experience was like, because I want to help, as was said in the introduction, demystify and destigmatize mental illness. And as I was sharing my story, I came to the final perspective, and that's the value of finding purpose to pain. So it's no longer something that I just cope with, but something that I'm able to tap into to support others and use as a resource. The experiences still suck, don't get me wrong. But instead of being ashamed of them or fighting them or coping with them, I'm now able to use them. So the 4 perspectives that I found for my journey of learning to live with bipolar: coping with symptoms of an illness, where I'm focusing on how I'm feeling, to managing the needs of a condition, where I'm focusing on what I'm doing, to personal growth and development, where I'm focusing on who I'm becoming, and then finding purpose to pain, which is finding how to use it. And that has been the journey that has made the biggest difference in my life.
Were there a slow, subtle change in your behavior or your feelings leading up to needing to be hospitalized, or was it a sudden change?
Sure. For me, I have my presentation with bipolar is more of a rapid cycling with mixed states. So growing up, I always kind of had these ups and downs. They got more and more extreme over time. The process, the depressive episode that led me to the hospitalization, was this slow, consistent, gradual decline that I could not, as I mentioned earlier, pull myself out of. And I eventually got to so it became, I didn't feel like I needed to ask for help because I could do it myself. Then it became something's going on, but I felt ashamed of it. Then it became, I don't want to involve anyone else because I feel myself falling apart, but I don't want to drag anyone down with me. And I didn't know how to ask for help anymore. And then it became just this numb, detached experience where it was just kind of getting through the day, and I had no idea how to ask for help. I really was losing track of what was going on, and it was just this empty numbness, and that was the
How
gradual
did
progression.
how did you end up in the hospital?
Um, I I hurt myself, and I still am dealing with that. And it's not necessarily a place I like to go in and talk about because it's like now that I'm doing well, I'm like, why did I go there and how did I let myself go there? But it was a very, very dark place, and I ended up having to be taken to the hospital and by my dad, and it was hard. It was definitely the lowest point in my life. I was feeling lost and and ashamed and just didn't know what to do and didn't know how to live.
In terms of that emotion of shame, you've mentioned it several times. Could you talk more about it? What is shame? And how there could be a positive role in a brief way for shame, but there also can be such a detrimental role. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. One of the things is I just always kind of grew up where you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps and did things. You managed the difficulty, and there was a difference between physical pain and mental pain, and oh, that's just a mental thing. Like I can get over it. And when I couldn't do that, then it became, well, something's wrong with me, and it started to become there's a character flaw that somehow this depression and not being able to pull myself out of it had to do with a character defect. And so then there was a shame associated with that. So that was an internal piece. Since when I went to the hospital and then the stigma of mental health came crashing down, that was another layer of shame. Since my journey, what I have found is so so that's where a lot of that shame and guilt and everything came from. I can't say that I was able to use shame as a rallying point or an impetus to cause change or anything like that, but it was very much something that I was trying to hide and avoid and beat myself up about. I mentioned how that's tied into stigma, and what I've really found is there's two types of stigma that I have experienced. One is community stigma, where there's relationships and things and how people treat you. You know, you go to the hospital because I had an appendix removed, and people were like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? I'm glad you're doing well. Can I make you soup for dinner?" Like there's this whole thing about how can I help you. But when I did mention that I was in this psychiatric hospital for depression, there was like this, oh, and nobody knew, and people didn't know how to react. People didn't know how to talk, and my experience of coming out of the hospital with depression is like the antidepressants took a good month to get to that therapeutic level, and that was a slow process. That was pretty hard, and a lot of times I felt like I was watching my life pass me by, and I'm in my late 20s, which I feel like I was supposed to be in my prime, going out and exploring and trying things. But the stigma, as I mentioned, there's two types. There's the community stigma, but there's also the self stigma. And absolutely, the community stigma is there and can be difficult, but the self stigma I have found to be the most challenging, where I identify it as with the label as being a part of my identity, not something that I have. Then, therefore, there's something wrong with me, and it becomes this glass ceiling that limits who I feel like I can be because I feel like I'm always broken or sick and wrong. So self stigma I have found to be more impactful than community stigma. And that was definitely tied in with shame.
The other day I saw online that there was a 24-year-old female influencer from India with a big, following
Mhm.
who died by suicide, right? She apparently had a child and she killed herself. What are your thoughts about those in the public eye, right? Or like you're, quote, you're admired by somebody else, or even in the mental health field where we're the helpers, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
at the level of shame that we may personally experience, and also the larger community. What will they think of us if I reveal something personal? And as you may know, when I was in medical school, I had attempted suicide. And was also diagnosed years later with bipolar 2 disorder. And, there's a national day in September for suicide awareness of physicians. There's a physician suicide awareness day.
yeah.
And we can be at higher risk, those in the mental health profession.
I think I think that plays a double standard that exists when we're a helper or we're idolized. There's this perception that there can't be a flaw, and we can put that perception on ourselves that somehow being human is there's a problem with imperfection in the humanity part. And there is that double standard in healthcare because there's this sense of, we're saying, healthcare providers are saying there should not be shame, there should not be stigma. It's just something to work with, and you should do this. But don't talk to me about me. I'm supposed to be impervious to it. And if I'm not, then I'm weak. And what I have found is when you're dealing with depression, I have found two major lies that depression says. Lie number one is it will always be this way. I will always feel this darkness. I will always feel this emptiness. And lie number two is I'm all alone. And those two things I found really paralyzed me. And I find that can really get the challenge of people when they're addressing it. So I think one of the big things we need to share, especially those of us who have experienced the darkness, is that it stinks right now. And yes, we all have to go through that journey ourselves. But number one, it will not always be that way because there are people who have gone through the darkness and there are things that can help. And number two, you don't have to go through that journey by yourself. There's, like I said, others that have gone through the journey that can understand the depth of the darkness, even though everyone has their own, but can understand the depth and the pain, and we can walk that journey with you.
Reflecting on what you just said and my thinking about this 24-year-old I read about the other day, there was apparently a very recent divorce, and she was struggling with that. And suicide, as you know, it's the 11th leading cause of death in the United States, and it's a worldwide epidemic in terms of suicide. It's the second leading cause of death in youth, although the highest proportion is elderly white males. And in the state where I live, in Oregon, it is the 8th leading cause of death. How can we, I don't know what the word is, reach out and help, right? Break through that isolation. I'm thinking of this young woman. She was 24 years old, right? How can we help her to save herself? It's tragically too late for her.
Yeah.
Okay? And her child is growing up now without a mother, and that child is themselves at increased risk of suicide. So it perpetuates itself. And I'm just thinking, I think there's increased knowledge about and I don't think it's lip service per se, but there's increased knowledge about you're not alone, right? Don't be ashamed. Here's the hotline number. And still, a 24-year-old, right, social media influencer, she ends her life.
Yeah. I think a lot of things have to do with context. And I've experienced in my journey with bipolar and the depression and the emptiness associated with it. And I think there's a difference between the helper approaching it like and hear the whole context. Don't I'm hoping you can hear the whole context. The experience is horrid. There's a difference between the helper coming at it like there's something wrong with you versus this is a really hard time that we can travel through together.
Let me be with you.
Let me sit with you in the pain. And I have also found that people cannot be with another person's pain if they cannot be with their own. Because when people are in that pain, it brings up that discomfort. And if someone's way of dealing with that discomfort is try to push it down or avoid it or fix it, then they automatically go into that mode with other people. They're avoiding people. They're trying to fall into fix it mode. And sometimes there's not an easy answer. Sometimes it's a process you have to go through, not something that you fix or avoid. And I think that's a very important piece of the process is for people to have that understanding and awareness. I think the mental health peer movement is a very powerful movement because it's people who have the courage to say, I've been there and there's hope. And I can sit in that darkness with you and I can share my story in a way that provides hope and support. Not just dump my stuff, not compare my stuff, not any of that kind of thing. But really just this piece of saying, you know what, I've been in that darkness too, and we can work through this. And that's different than making someone wrong or a character flaw for having it, or someone feeling like they have a character flaw for having it. And I think that things like this, where there's a conversation around it, can help soften the intensity of that stigma and help provide the hope. I'm a huge proponent of peer-based respite programs because you can go to them and talk with other people who are having a challenge that are doing okay with having gone through that challenge or are facing that challenge themselves but have learned ways to work with it. It's like if a woman who is pregnant going through pregnancy, I can have compassion for that, but I don't understand what that's like. I don't have that shared experience to relate to. Or a doctor, like a primary care doctor who has patients and is going through a challenge themselves. And how do you blend that between being the helper while in pain and go through that journey? Like a fellow doctor will understand that experience more and be able to support that. So this whole piece about peers is people who have shared experiences sharing the journey with each other. And I think that is a very powerful piece. And I think that is a big part where the answer can lie, because it's people sharing the journey, not trying to I just think that that's a very important and very powerful piece to share the journey.
Steve, I just thought of the word in the context of what you were just sharing of respect, that the person who is going through that life channel, rather than imagining feeling, or possibly being told that they're a failure, that they are respected with the meaning of respect, right? To be honored, to be seen again, respect for what they're going through, right? Which puts aside judgment, right? What a difference it would make just to embody and express, I respect you for what you're going through. Let me be with you. Let's talk about what can be done, right?
Oh my gosh, 100%. And I think being an influencer and dealing with social media and what that has brought into the process and peace has added difficulty because comparison is huge. And if there's one thing that I've learned about when I compare myself with others, I don't compare my strengths with other people's strengths. I compare my challenges with their strengths. Oh, these people are really good with it and I have struggle with it. And I've learned that with social media, oftentimes we put this painted picture of either our best selves or what we want to present like an image out there. It's not presenting the authenticity and wholeness of the human experience in general. There are some people that use it as a platform to demystify things and try to share that. Absolutely. But I don't find that the norm. And so what happens is when we're dealing with that comparison, when we're comparing our challenges with other people's strengths, that can start to fall into that piece where we're broken, there's something wrong with us, and that we're the only ones that are going through it because everybody else looks like they're doing well. And that image is not authentic of
That's what
perfection.
Photoshop your life.
Yes.
You can't Photoshop reality.
And the thing that I have found is that we may be able to support each other with our strengths, but I'm finding we actually connect with each other through our challenges. Relationship is based on that ability to be authentic and real with people and have that authenticity respected. And I have found with my marriage, it's not about this picture perfect front and being this great, uh, all supportive husband that does everything. It is being supportive, but it's also there's power when we can both open up the closets of the skeletons and have our imperfections, being aware of those, not having to be hidden, and be able to be respected, like you mentioned earlier. And that authenticity is with it. And I think if we look at it, the people that we connect with the most are the people that are authentic as opposed to that perfect image. So I think that that's an important piece of the process for healing is allowing people to be human.
The true self versus the false self. Yeah. I recently was watching a video of a presentation through an organization called Creativity and Madness. And the presentation given by a social worker was on the singer-songwriter Leonard Cohen.
Mm.
And I didn't know that he had suffered, right, with depression through a great portion of his life. And out of that experience, uh, some of his greatest music emerged. Finding what you were saying, purpose, right? Transformation of the pain.
That piece of being able to express a certain experience and communicate it, I have found to be very important, not only for the person doing the expressing and the person feeling it's soothing when you're able to articulate it. I found when I can say it, it takes it away from being this marble rolling in my head to
Good metaphor. Yeah.
a thing that I can address. It doesn't make it always go away, but it gives it edges so that it's not all encompassing. It gives it a form that can be dealt with and softened. And that's part of the reason why I wrote Move with the Morph, the children's book, is because that inner journey of finding oneself. What I have found is, so there's a bell curve that exists in the human experience. And if you're having pieces of yourself that are outside of the bell curve, it can be hard comparing yourself with the bell curve. And that comparison and self-identity, we start looking at outside of ourselves. How do we compare with others around us? How do we compare with the bell curve? And that I have found to be disempowering. But when we look inside ourselves, when we see our own strengths, when we're able to connect with our own values, when we start to have that appreciation of ourselves, and that comes through an internal journey and process of growth and development and wisdom, I have found to be a much healthier source of self-identity. And so Mubu the Morph is all about a journey of Mubu being a creature that can transform into different things, finding his own heart song through his heart's whisper. And that's when he realizes he can be the entity it wants to be, as opposed to trying to be something to find something externally. And I really like Mubu the Morph. It was a fun write.
And your book has won some awards, yes? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it won the Mom's Choice Award. And it's got a rhyming rhythm. And if it's okay, I will take 30 seconds and share the beginning of the book just to get a flavor of it.
Oh, yes, please do.
All right. Mubu made many morphing mistakes. Sometimes mad, sometimes sad, sometimes glad, sometimes bad. He used the gifts that he had, and always Mubu grew. He grew in ways he did not know. He grew in ways that did not show. He grew in ways that made him go, though sometimes it was slow. Sometimes when slow, he could not see where to go or who to be. Ski in the snow, climb up a tree, look down below, find you, find me, and so Mubu morphed. And I'll leave it at that.
Wow, beautiful. And you have a beautiful voice, too.
Thank you.
Yeah. I could see children identifying with that, but also adults.
I really was inspired by Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You Will Go, because it's got that fun rhyme and rhythm to it, but it's a message that grows with you over time. And I appreciated that message. And so that's where I was hoping Mubu would be, is that message that a person that can grow with the person throughout their life and still have that fun way to reach kids and things. And we're working on, I connected with Endeavor. It's a mental health organization in Buffalo, New York. And we're working on some complementary material that can support caregivers, teachers, counselors to be able to take some of the themes and messages in the book and help have those conversations with people. So I'm excited about that.
Maybe there's a way for the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts or the scouting community to use your book.
That would be fun. I believe in its message. I think the message is important, and I'm definitely interested in sharing the message while supporting organizations. I think that's the point, is that builds community. So the more that we can do with that, I'm very open and interested in connecting and supporting organizations with the book and with the message.
I'd like to go back again in terms of how you were trying to help yourself. You mentioned that before.
Yes.
Ending up in the hospital with the help of your dad. But how were you initially trying to help yourself?
Sure. So as I mentioned, in the beginning, it was about feeling better and how can I feel better? And what I found, and in the beginning, I was looking at meds to fix it. And then I was looking at there would be this right thing that would take all the discomfort away. Kind of like an antibiotic, where you're going a certain way, you feel sick, you take the antibiotic and it brings you back to how you were. And what I learned over time is that an antipsychotic is different, because it doesn't necessarily it's not like this thing that makes all the yucky stuff go away, but it does soften its intensity so that I can learn to live with it. A couple things made the biggest difference for me. One is understanding that negative self-talk piece. That is huge. And when I was dealing with depression and when I deal with anxiety, that negative self-talk can be pretty loud and
Can
pretty
you give some
inflating.
examples of thoughts you might have had going through your head, or the thoughts
Yeah,
that you've heard of from others?
I'm a loser. I can't do this. I'm broken. This is hopeless. All that kind of stuff. So it really is this downward spiral that is talking down on me.
I'll never be happy
I'll
again.
I'll, I'll never
No,
be.
no one will ever love me.
It will always be this way. I'm all alone. All that kind of self-talk. Now, I have learned that that is an opinion, not facts. And while it can be very significant, it can be very loud, it can be very intense. My ability to relate with it as an opinion allows me to say, thank you for sharing, and then have some facts. And I have found that the more ands I create, it's not this single thought, it becomes one opinion of many things. And while I don't know how to make it go away, but I have found that it softens it and it makes it smaller. And then I have room to do things. And on a side note, what I have found is negative self talk is a human thing. Now, the intensities can be different. The causes of that can be different. Because, like, when I proposed to my wife, I was uncomfortable. I felt bad. What if she says no? Am I good enough? Dealing with that, it was negative self talk and doubt. When I went for interviews, am I good enough? Are they going to select me? Like, all that kind of stuff is negative self talk. So, functionally, they're the same. The intensities can be different. The causes can be different, but the skill of addressing it is the same in those situations, because you're saying this is an opinion, this is in fact, here are some other facts that I can also say. It softens the intensity of it, and I can work on with what's important to me. That's the medication and the internal dialogue relationship with the experience that made a huge difference. Coping with symptoms of an illness. Managing the needs of a condition, I started to find from occupational therapy approach, which is the activities that you do so you can be successful. So, for example, when I'm dealing with depression and anxiety, my energy level can be very low and I can have a very foggy head where it's hard for me to think through things and figure stuff out. Two things that I found to be helpful is, number one, put my clothes out the night before. Because when I wake up, if I'm in that foggy head, not figuring it out, I'm not stuck trying to figure out how to get dressed. I'm just putting on what I've already put out. So it helps me go through the morning routine without having to initiate everything. Because,
And make a choice, which can be very difficult when one is anxious and or depressed.
yes. And what I have found is there's a huge difference between following through with familiar things and initiating new things. So, like, I use a schedule and I'll put stuff in my schedule. And if I'm having a foggy day, like, it'll say at 9 o'clock, send the email on blah, 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 blah. So even if that's different than having a to-do list that I have to figure out what I'm going to start with and how I'm going to do it. So those are just two examples that I have found about how do I work with some of these different experiences. And then it becomes working with it, not trying to make it go away and fight it. So those things have given me access to living and following through on the things that are most important to me, which has given me an understanding of a distinction. And that is this distinction between happiness and fulfillment. Like, I don't know how to be happy when I'm dealing with depression, dealing with anxiety, all those kinds of things. But what I have learned is if I can lean into my values, if I can lean into my priorities, if I can do those things that are meaningful, I can be fulfilled because I'm doing important things even while I'm feeling uncomfortable. And sometimes that fulfillment is attainable while happiness may not be. And if I'm chasing happiness, then I'm beating myself up with what I can't do versus fulfillment, which is actually appreciating what I can do even if I'm not feeling well.
That word satisfaction, that that was what, a goal, that I was able to accomplish that, no matter how small that might be, the fact that it was done, that I could do that. And I'm also thinking that sometimes we can be chasing happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe the thing that we so much want, it happened. But then if our goal becomes the next thing,
Mm-hmm.
like we're chasing our own tail, as it were. Could you say something about that?
100%. And I have found, don't get me wrong, having things that you're going towards is important. But there's a difference between going towards a goal and living and leaning into a value. And empty goals or goals built around what I should do is fleeting if I make it and abusive if I don't. Because if I make it, it becomes, yeah, I did it. Okay, now what's the next thing I should do? It's like it's a very brief thing. And if I don't make it, then it becomes, oh, I'm a failure. I couldn't do this. I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. And you're constantly beating yourself up. That's different than having a value that I want to lean into. And so I'm going to try and do this on the journey and
Could you
allowing that
give an
value.
example of a value?
So for me, one of the things that I find of a value is communication and being able to share authentically. And two examples of that is publishing the book Move with the Morph. And I wanted it. And then if I have the goal of trying to make it a bestseller and all this other kind of stuff, that's actually not that easy to do. But if that's my goal and I don't make it, then I am feeling like a failure and I couldn't make it happen and I didn't do it. That's different than holding and leaning into the message of trying to help demystify and destigmatize mental illness, about leaning into, I want to help people find purpose to their pain. I want to help demystify and destigmatize mental illness. There's a message, and then I want authentically to be able to share that message and lean into that. Then even if I'm not a bestseller, but I'm able to help people and people are able to get something out of the book and enjoy the book, then I'm successful. So that's the difference between a goal of how I feel like what I should do, like make it a bestseller, versus being clear on the message and the values of the process and leaning into those. And then I'm able to experience whether or not those are happening.
Your opinion, Steve, on, I'll put this in quotation marks, the culture at large. So your opinion on the culture at large from an unhealthy perspective of what success is. How do people define success?
I have
Or how
found,
does our culture
sure.
define success?
I think American culture is very much independent. Like you have to be able to do it yourself. And I think things are, if there's the comparing yourself with others and what's the image. That tends to be what's fanned, if you will. Not necessarily authentic relationships, not necessarily collaboration. Even a matter of you're achieving it, but that whole piece about lifelong growth isn't necessarily always talked about. There's kind of this thing like you do it right or you do it wrong. So I think those are some things that culturally tends to be upfront. And I think success, number one, I have found that my quality of life improves when I can be clear on those values and principles and characteristics that are important to me. I lean into those, I do things based on those, and then those are reflected back to me. And the more those exist in my life, the more fulfilled I am. Not the goals that I achieve or the things that I do or the things that I have. It's the presence of my values that I see in my relationships, in my work, in my hobbies, in my social experiences. For example, being able to be authentic and have authentic communication is important to me. I have that with my wife. I am involved with Toastmasters, and so giving speeches and talking about it. I give presentations to colleges regularly about mental health and what those experiences feel like, and to be able to try to help occupational therapists have more appreciation, sensitivity, and understanding around mental health and mental illness to be better therapists. So I'm able to bring my authenticity to my activities and relationships. And because that exists, I find that I'm more fulfilled. So it's the clarity of values and the ability to live into those values and have those values present. That's where success lies. And that requires people to grow in with self-understanding and wisdom. And that's where it comes over time. Once we're chasing a carrot, once we're chasing a thing, once we're comparing ourselves with others, once we're doing things that we feel like we should do, that takes us off a different path. And if our values are not present in those things, then there's emptiness. That's kind of like you put your ladder, you climb it, but then you realize you're on the wrong wall. So you may have climbed the ladder, but it didn't lead where you what's important. And so you got to come down, you got to, get the ladder on the right wall and go from there. So that's where I feel success really lies into, is clarity and fulfillment of those values. So those values and principles and priorities exist in your life and you see them and experience them.
I've been in spaces, Steve, maybe you have too, perhaps, where a group meeting, and
Mhm.
it could be, let's share, the leader is saying, let's share wins. Who has some wins to share, right?
Mhm.
And people, we'll talk about, and we'll put it in quotation marks, their most recent success, right?
Mhm.
But I wish that there were spaces where, instead of talking about quote wins, we talked about, um, who wants to share what they've been struggling with lately. I think that would just open the shades, let in the sunlight, breathe some air into the room, right? And it could be, through the struggle, I have learned X, Y, and Z, and this is what I'm doing now. But the most important aspect is I'm human, right?
Mhm.
If I want to grow as a value, right, there's going to be some initial struggling, right? As toddlers, we were falling down all the time before we could
100%.
stand and walk, right? With some help and then on our own. But I've never been in a space where someone said, let's talk about what we're struggling with. That would be such an embrace. Like, what do you think of that? And why don't we talk about that?
And I think the context of sharing the struggles is important too. And I think if we're leading that, it's really important to share that a struggle is a part of the process,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
not that you're trapped in it, getting beaten by it. Like, granted, you can feel that way in the moment, 100%. Don't get me wrong. It sometimes it feels like it's beating you up and beating you when you're going through it. The thing I love about the mental health peer movement is that you're sharing your story to show there's hope. This is my struggle. This is some of the things that I did. This is the growth that I went through, and this is what I've learned and what I'm now able to do with it. And I think that there's a context there that's important to help frame that this is a growth journey, not a character deficit. And that I think is rooted back what you were saying a little culturally. It's almost like if we're not having the future we thought we were supposed to have, then all of a sudden we get into there's something wrong.
Yeah, I'm not where I thought I should be, or I should be.
Exactly. And when we allow life to be growth, then we are able to look at life more with curiosity and creation versus expectation and projection. And I found the biggest struggle I had when I was in my depressive episodes, actually, let me back up. The thing that I have found to be very helpful in my recovery journey or my growth journey is to be able to let go of the future I thought I was supposed to have so that I could be present and create the journey that I'm having. And I think that that's an important part of the process, because we can pretend that we are supposed to have a certain thing and then we get upset when we don't have it. But the creation process is far more magical and far more unknown, because we're making it up and then we're having what we're having. And being able to be present to that, I think, has a lot more fulfillment and a lot more health and strength in that mode.
I don't know if you can respond to this from your own personal experience or professional experience, but what are your thoughts on, let's say you have a family member who says, but Steve, I thought you would be X, Y, and Z by now, or I never imagined that you would be in a psychiatric hospital, right? What are your thoughts on what we're able to say to a person who has an expectation of who we are, right? In a bit of a judgmental way, and we want to respond to them. What do we say?
Sure. And I think I didn't think I was going to be in a mental health hospital either. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of it, but
Yes.
there's something to be said about, instead of fighting, there's an authenticity there. I didn't think I was going to be in a mental health hospital. I didn't even think I was going to be an occupational therapist. But these are the things that I've learned and grown through, and these are the things I'm able to do with my challenges. And I find that helpful.
Something that you said earlier I thought was so beautiful, amongst many things that you've shared. But when you talked about how a person needs to be able to understand and be loving, caring towards their own pain, to be able to connect authentically and be with somebody who's also experiencing emotional pain. And it made me reflect on a personal experience that I had had. As I mentioned, when I was in my late 20s, I attempted suicide and I was medically hospitalized. Could have been psychiatrically admitted when I stabilized medically, but by then I was no longer acutely suicidal and could not be committed against my will. But what happened was, apparently, my father had either come to the hospital, which I don't remember, or spoke to me shortly after when maybe I was discharged. Decades and decades and decades later, so now like I'm in my 40s, my father says he wants to apologize to me for something he had said to me at the time that I had attempted suicide. And I had, Steve, no memory at all of what he was talking about. But apparently it had weighed on him for decades. And he said to me, Diane, I want to apologize for telling you. Diane, the next time you want to kill yourself, tell me, and I'll tell you the right way to do it. And that was obliterated from my memory. And then as a 40-something-year-old, I received my father's apology. And over the years, I thought many, many times, how could he have said that to his daughter, right?
Yeah.
And listening to you, it gave me another perspective on how he could say that he must have also had so much internal emotional pain that he could not deal with. So the idea of killing oneself was the only advice he could give me.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a very unfortunate thing. I think that's a very painful thing. And I think that that's a very difficult thing to hear and go through. And I would say that when people are in pain and don't understand it and haven't developed skills to work with it, people can be very defensive with it in how they relate with it and express it and work with it. And as was mentioned earlier, if you can't be with your own pain, you can't be with someone else's. And the way you deal with your own pain is the way you deal with someone else's pain. And so,
That idea of shame too. I
yeah.
think in some families, family members can be ashamed of what's happening to their child or their sibling.
And I think a lot of that shame comes from the future we thought we were going to have or the future we feel like we should have. There's this image that we feel like things are supposed to be, and if they're not the way if they're not showing up the way we feel like they're supposed to be, then there's something wrong. And that's very different than being understanding of where things are and working with that. And that's why, and like, for example, when I was working in occupational therapy and I was working in a rehab facility, if someone had a stroke, it's not and lost the use of the right side of their body, and now they're having to relearn how to get dressed, and simple activities that they did automatically are now a struggle. Part of what's going on is grieving the loss of the future that you thought you were going to have, the future that you were planning for, the future that you were looking forward to, the future that you were supposed to have, and having to now realize that there's a new future that I'm going to be creating. And I think the same kind of thing can happen with shame, is that we measure up the thing that we're supposed to do or we thought we were supposed to do, and it's not matching up, but we're not able to see that we're creating something new. And I think that can get tied in with some of that stuff.
I had mentioned earlier that it's the older white male is at significant risk of suicide. Could you speak to that? Why is that? And I know there potentially also is a role that gun possession plays into this also. More suicides than homicides related to
Yeah.
guns.
I think I think some of that has to do with culture and self identity. I know I kind of feel there's this piece where I'm supposed to be able to provide, protect. Um, I'm supposed to be strong and independent, and I should be able to do what's important and what's required,
All
and
those shoulds,
all
yeah.
those shoulds.
They say don't should on yourself.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned, there's that difference between the future I should have and think I'm going to have and the one that I'm creating. And those are two different perspectives. And I think we come up with an identity for what we do. I am a doctor. I am a lawyer. I am um, whatever. And I am a CEO. I am a garbage man. I am, I'm a waiter. I'm,
Or
you know,
I am a potentially a parent. But then when some of those roles that we're playing, I guess identity versus role, when that role disappears, it's
So,
one thing to be a parent of a 2-year-old. It's another to be the parent of a 45-year-old.
and there becomes a difference between becoming of being the provider and then becoming a dependent or feeling as though you're going down that spectrum. So I think the loss of identity, the loss of role, the change, there's the if we're not able to embrace change, then we run into that loss of what we think we should have. That's my perception, based on what I've heard and what people are doing, and where that emptiness can sometimes come from. And then when you're that emptiness, then it's like I'm all alone and I'm a burden, and then it becomes you almost go to this place. Well, how can I be the least burdensome? And then and just kind of going down that path. So I think that's where some of that stuff happens, and then that's tied into the feeling and the means. And if you have the means for a quick, acute process, that's that gives you access to it easier than if you don't. And so some of that, those I think are some ingredients in the stew. I tend to look at things as contributing factors, not answers, um, because I have found that the closer you get to a challenge, the more complex it is. If you're distant from it, then it seems like it's an easy answer. But the closer you are to it, the more complex, the more layers you see, the more factors are involved, and because you have a greater appreciation with what's going on. So I look at it like ingredients in the process, not so much the answer or reason.
The Hold On campaign was named Hold On, in part related to just those words. If we could only hold on and not act on those suicidal thoughts, right? That there is the space and time and opportunity for change, right? Feelings come and go, thoughts come and go. Uh, what are your thoughts on if someone, perhaps even listening right now, is in the intensity of suicidal despair, right? Feeling, what were the words you used before? Hopeless, broken,
Broken and
and
ashamed.
someone is in that, what, terrible experience, right? But there could also be in that self-loathing.
Hmm.
Um, how can that person live for another moment, live for another day? What would you recommend? And also, if you could speak to friends and family who may notice that something is not quite right, what can they do?
Sure. So to the person having the experience, I want to reach out and I just want to say I respect you and acknowledge the pain and acknowledge the discomfort and acknowledge the challenge and agree with you that it sucks. And I just want to say that share that the two lies that I've experienced is that it will always be this way and I'm all alone. And I just want to share that while the darkness sucks in the moment, there are things that can help. So it does not always have to be this way. And when you're feeling alone, I just want to share that people have gone through the darkness, and that while, yes, the journey sucks when you're going through it, you don't have to go through it alone. And there are people that can help because people have gone through it. So you're not unique in the sense that you're the only one going through it. It's not a character flaw. It's just an experience that really sucks right now. And so I just want to let you
You
know that
can survive. You can survive it.
exactly. So that's for the person who's going through it. For the family member that's seeing a person going through it, I also want to acknowledge the pain and challenge that that experience has and the difficulty that that experience has. And I want to think, or I want to share that ability to be with someone when they're going through the pain, and share with them that I understand that you're in pain and I respect the pain you're having, and I'm willing to walk through this with you so you don't have to do it alone, I think is a valuable message that can be shared. There aren't magic fairy dust to fix it. It's not like there's going to be this one thing you do to take away the pain. But you can let people know that it's not, they're not alone in it, and that there is help out there, and that we're willing to walk that journey with you and help connect you with the support. And I think that message of authenticity is stronger than trying to fix a problem.
Can be, let's say a person has been hospitalized, to keep them out of harm's way, and also to provide treatment, whether that be medication, and it's usually a combination. Could be medication, therapy. There may be a need for ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, or even higher level of care, day treatment program, right? But when the person is discharged from the hospital, they can be at risk of a suicidal state of mind upon that discharge within the first couple of weeks. And it's so important to continue to reach out and extend that caring to the person, especially then,
Oh, 100%. Well, I'll tell you, when I went through my depressive episode and I was hospitalized, yes, it softened the intensity from the help and the medicine and the structure, but I was scared because I couldn't manage life before I went in, and life was still out there. So I get discharged and life is still happening. If I don't know how to manage it, then I'm still back where I was. So this whole piece about that fear after hospital, because hospitalization, it's not like you go there. How do I put this? The hospital um, is a artificial environment that can keep you and others safe, but it doesn't, and it can help with medicine, but it doesn't fix the life problem. That's why I'm so big on the peer movement. That's why I'm so big on peer respite houses where you're able to, and that's why I'm so big on relationships with people that can understand the struggle, because now you're able to start working with, how do I work with this? And if you can have those relationships and connections, then you're not alone. And you can learn skills and develop supports to help you work through those challenges. So I think, again, coming out of the hospital, I definitely had shame. I definitely felt guilt. And so those are all realities that come with it, beyond just the symptom of having the emptiness and the darkness. So that's why I agree with you. It's really important that relationships can be a part of the process.
How can our listeners learn more about peer support? And even, let's say they're in treatment, to talk to their provider about, hey, I'd like to have a peer specialist and be part of my wraparound services.
Yeah, I think that if you Google mental health peer support near me, and that can help find different things. And there are organizations that are peer led, where the majority of people have lived experience and that are helping bring that perspective and philosophy and heart to programs and things. Some clinics and some organizations have peers on staff. The peer movement is definitely getting more influential and involved and incorporated in mental health. But if you were to, mental health peer services near me, like for example, there's the DBSA, Depression Bipolar Support Alliance. That's a national organization, and they have peer support groups that are virtual and in person. So that's just one example. If you're dealing with depression and you're dealing with suicidal thoughts, that's an example of an organization that can have people that have experienced the darkness and understand that.
say a person feels in need of help for a crisis, or they're having suicidal thoughts, and they call 988, right, the national hotline number, that in that conversation, I would think a person could also say, I've heard about peer support, can you assist me with that in some way?
That
I
would be
think that what you're bringing up is so important. I don't know if everyone knows about peer specialists and groups that can be of help, especially in person and online.
100%. And think about the context. There's a different context. The context is, let's go through this journey together.
Mhm.
And I've been there and I can help. And I think that that's a very powerful context that can be empowering.
Steve, how can we learn more about you and your wonderful book? You have a website, or what would you
Yep.
recommend?
I have a website. It's my name, StephenNowotniak.com. I know it's a super easy way to spell it, but in the description is my name. So it's just StephenNowotniak.com. My books, Mood with a Morph, Handbook for Healthy Living with a Mood Disorder, and Bipolar Life Hacks are available on like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, those kinds of online booksellers. And yeah.
I'm so grateful for you joining us today, and you're turning pain, right, into purpose for yourself and so many others. Do you have any final words you'd like to share before we say goodbye?
I really want to thank you, Diana, for inviting me to be a part of the conversation and part of your podcast. I really honor and respect what you're doing. I think it's an amazing thing. The two main things that I again just want to reiterate: if you yourself are experiencing the darkness, it's not always going to be this way. There's things that can help, and you're not alone. There are people who have gone through the journey that can support you along the way. Reaching out is the first step. And then for those who are seeing somebody going through it, I acknowledge their frustration and the challenge and the discomfort associated with that. And again, it is about supporting someone through the process so that they can have that experience of health and wellness and healing, not just trying to fix the problem.
Thank you again so much, Steve. Bye.
Thank you, Diana. Bye.